It's Tuesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me today, Conservative MP and former Health Minister Steve Brine, former Labour MP and National Secretary of the People's Assembly Laura Pidcock, the Government Advisor on Homelessness Dame Louise Casey, and The Spectator's economics correspondent Kate Andrews. As the Indian variant spreads, appeals to those refusing COVID vaccines.
They protect you, they protect your loved ones, and they will help us all get out of this pandemic.
We'll ask this Tory MP if, like some of his colleagues, he's worried the timetable for reopening is slipping. Politicians are accused of inciting this crowd who surrounded an immigration enforcement van in Glasgow. The local MP joins us.
Cheers!
New signs of life in the UK economy as job vacancies reach pre-pandemic levels. But for the millions living in poverty, what's next?
We will have to have a big plan to deal with the wounds inflicted by this pandemic.
We'll ask Dame Louise Casey whether, 4 months on, she's seen evidence of one. We're going to start with something different. Let's just show you this story covered by BBC News. It's headlined Climate Change. Ban all gas boilers from 2025 to reach net zero. In fact, it was the most read story this morning on the BBC News website. It's the International Energy Agency saying that no new fossil fuel boilers should be sold from 2025 if the world is to achieve net zero emissions by the middle of this century. So my question, opening the programme to all of you, is should we ban new gas boilers from 2025? Let's start with you, Laura.
It's a surprise question. Good afternoon. I think that sometimes these kind of single issue policies like banning gas boilers or, the carrier bag situation and using renewable carrier bags, in my mind, take our focus away from some of the big questions. I am in favour of any initiative that stops climate catastrophe, that curtails the path that we are on, that is already ravaging the planet, but we need to look at what are the main contributors to the destruction of our planet. It's the huge corporations who don't have many restrictions upon them. It's this kind of perpetual search for growth and consumption and production of things that aren't necessarily useful to the preservation of the planet. But I am in favour of anything that takes us towards solutions, towards saving the planet.
So you would be in favour of banning that as part of a sort of approach to tackle climate change?
Well, what I would definitely be in favour of, just to kind of answer your question directly, is support, because when you ban things like that, what I want to make sure is those who are on the lowest incomes, those who are in fuel poverty, are supported by the state to have their models replaced. It can't just be that you don't provide any kind of support in a transition and newer forms of energy.
All right, well, let's just stick to the principle of it. Steve, what about you? Would you be in favour of banning new gas boilers by 2025?
I'm not surprised it's the most read story. It's certainly a bold move, but it's very difficult. But, we have to tackle the issue of existing housing stock. We've made the big projections around 75% reduction in emissions, and that's fine. That's the overriding strategy. But then it comes down to the detail. This is not a government announcement. This is a suggestion, and it's a bold suggestion. And actually, I think it should be looked at. We had the Green Deal, which didn't work. We had the Green Homes Grant, which has recently been stopped. I know that my colleagues at the Business Department are working on a successor to that, and they need to. But yeah, absolutely. Maybe the first and last time today, Laura and I will agree, but we do need to make sure that those that are not left out as a result of this change. And we all sort of sit here in middle-class comfort saying, oh, yes, we should boil our gas, get rid of our gas boilers.
Right. Well,
but we have to deal with the problem of existing housing stock.
Well, and that point, perhaps you can address that point, Louise. This is one of 400 steps, actually, in the new report by the agency. But heat creates about a quarter of the UK's climate warming emissions. So fuel poverty mentioned by both Laura and Steve. What's your response to the idea of banning new gas boilers by 2025?
Well, I mean, with all of the sort of the green issues, I sometimes feel now that what we need is the equivalent of SAGE. So somebody that is independent.
We definitely don't need that.
And outside that actually can, thanks Steve, disagree with you there, that actually can work through what is the best way forward. Obviously, we want the climate change to be majorly addressed, but I'm with both Steve and Laura that actually at the moment I'm worrying about people having heating at all as we go into the summer and then into the winter. And there's kind of a priorities, isn't there, about what you do. And then my other little thing is quite often let's take local traffic neighbourhoods in London. I mean, talk about forcing something in without thinking about the consequences. So you introduce a massive, great eco drive to actually cut down the numbers of cars in London. And what we're seeing is a rise in street crime in my own street, where actually the local traffic neighbours have been, because there's no CCTV, and all of the traffic put into places where there are no bus lanes. So I don't disagree with it. I just think people need to think through what the consequences are. And as the technocrat in me, you've got to do it properly and well, which means actually people can't just be told you can't have a gas boiler anymore if the option is something much more expensive. That just pushes more people in poverty into poverty.
Kate, what do you think?
Well, I think that's exactly right. And the question, I think, is framed in the wrong way. It's not whether or not we should ban something. It's whether or not the alternative is going to be there that is as affordable, as good, and so people don't feel like they're missing out. The only way that we're going to hit these targets and do it in a politically feasible way is if the public is coming along with the government. They're very ambitious targets, and these are the conversations that have not been had. We haven't been very transparent with the public yet about what some of these trade-offs might be. So I'm not surprised that the most read article on the BBC News's website, this will be concerning to a lot of people. So the question is, what is the alternative? Can people afford it? And is this something that they want to do, as well as something that's good for the planet?
All right, we'll leave it there. And I just want to draw everyone's attention, our viewers' attention, to this headline on the front page of the Daily Mail. Now, vaccine refuseniks threaten freedom. Tory MPs warn Boris Johnson not to delay unlocking on June the 21st over the few who won't have the jab. Steve, are you one of those Tory MPs?
Well, I have been for a long time. I mean, I said in the Commons probably at the end of last year that we cannot be in a position where people who refuse the vaccine hold back the rest of the country. Let's not overblow the refuseniks. I mean, there was some YouGov research yesterday, which Matt Hancock spoke about in the Commons, which said that we are, over 90% acceptance of a vaccine. So I don't think we should blow it, because then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy about people who think, well, if there are others refusing it, maybe I should too. But no, I mean, look, at the end of the day, as former public health minister, we're not compelling people to take the vaccine. We are making a persuasive argument to do so. And I would have thought what's happening in Bolton right now is an incredibly persuasive argument to do so. But, if you decide not to take the vaccine, then, that is on you. At the end of the day, we don't ban smoking. People smoke. And if you do so, you have a higher likelihood of contracting lung cancer. We still treat you when that happens. But, at the end of the day, if you refuse to take this vaccine, there are consequences to that. And that then leads on to the whole bigger picture about moving on to live with COVID as an endemic disease, as the chief scientific officer rightly said it will now become.
Right. Should it be mandatory, Louise, having the vaccine?
I think I would go as close to mandatory as is humanly possible without making it mandatory, if that makes sense. I think we're a way off that, though, Jo. I think the take-up rate. I know we're all talking about Bolton and the Northwest and today, but the take-up rate in London, first and second dose, whether it's take-up rate or effectiveness, hard to tell. But it's not just the Northwest. I mean, I think that the issue we've got to think about here is that there are very complicated reasons why people are suspicious. They may not be refuseniks. English as a second language is a major barrier to health in the best of times. Poverty is a very significant barrier. People who are poor are significantly more likely to have ill health. Where I disagree with Steve is that I just don't think it's acceptable to have people in a year from now who still are refusing and to take part in our civil life and our civic society if they haven't had the vaccine. And I don't want to do it immediately, Jo, but I think there's a responsibility here which is different to smoking, which is different to other things, which is this transmits to other people and it will kill them. And therefore, our moral responsibility to each other is very, very high. And I think we're a way off it, but I think we need to get these vaccinations, mass vaccinations, done everywhere. No excuses. Not getting them into the communities, which is what some people are saying was happening in Bolton, is wrong.
Right.
Take-up rate has to be really, really high, and then we circle back for the people that don't think that they should have it.
Steve, you wanted to respond, and then I'll bring in the other two.
Yeah, because for me, Jo, what this goes to is that sense of proportion. We have vaccinated the top 9 groups, 99% of those who will get hospitalised and die from this. We've now double-dosed the top 4 groups, and we're well on our way to double-dosing the top 9 groups. So at the end of the day, what is Louise proposing? That we pin people down and jab them? Actually, we've worked really hard to produce stuff in different languages, to go door to door, to put stuff in people's communities. We've worked really, really hard to do that. But, if some young people decide they don't want to have it, well, I mean, that is on them. And, the odds are that they will not get very sick from this. And those who they could pass it on to who could get very sick from this have already been vaccinated once and probably twice. So, do we believe in the efficacy of these vaccines or not? I believe that we should, and all the evidence suggests that we should. I've seen no evidence to suggest that the vaccines don't work against the B1617.2 variant, which I insist that we call it, even though that's terribly boring, because I think calling it the Indian variant
it's quite tricky to remember as well. But I take your point. OK, but look, Laura, can I get your response on a couple of those things that Steve and Louise have said? Because Yasmin Qureshi, the Labour MP for Bolton South East, one of the areas where there has been a rise in the number of people with this particular type of variant, has blamed poor infrastructure, not vaccine hesitancy. Do you agree with her?
Do you know what? I think this is a classic example of where the government go, look over there. Don't look at what we are doing. Look over there. Look at these people who are refusing to have the vaccine. In my experience, people are so overwhelmed and excited to get that call that the vaccine is available and have been taking it. And of course, there might be some people who are hesitant, and I think we should be patient with that because, as Louise said, there are complicated reasons why people might not want the vaccine. Steve also contradicted himself a bit, talked about how much of the take-up of those first 9 higher risk groups have actually had the vaccine. What is causing us difficulties as we emerge from this pandemic, and what caused us difficulties kind of in the most intense periods of the pandemic, the first lockdown, the second lockdown, is the government's reluctance to support people who have to self-isolate. Statutory sick pay is a measly amount. I'm sure Steve could not live on it. I think as well, the kind of the fine if you don't isolate when you are positive, I think £10,000 was the kind of threat, is a barrier for people to come and get tested, the catastrophe over the test and trace system. But you know what? Let's look over there at a minority of people who aren't or are reluctant to or fearful of getting vaccinated. I mean, it's a trick. The government have failed us on so many counts throughout this pandemic. And actually, one of the most positive things is the vaccine and the rollout of the vaccine.
Right, Steve,
and blaming a minority of people is just so pathetic.
Right, Steve, I'll come back to you in a minute. But first of all, Kate, do you think it could, though, delay and should delay June the 21st?
It's a really difficult question, Jo, because there's so much we still don't know about this virus. It changes, it throws us all the time. So I think everyone, regardless of what perspective you come from, has to keep the open mind that things could change. Based on the evidence that we have now, our vaccines are effective and they're working against the Indian variant. That is key, that is crucial. Vaccines are the way out of this, they work. And it has been very refreshing, finally, to see the Prime Minister and his officials take that line, seeing jabs as the answer, because it was just mere months ago that they were coming dangerously close to actually talking down these vaccines, something that I don't think has helped amongst certain, albeit small groups that are hesitant to take the vaccine. I think the real question that no politician wants to ask, because it's a difficult one, is what risk are we willing to tolerate as we come out of lockdown? We're not going for a zero COVID strategy. It would be near impossible to do so in the UK. We have multiple working vaccines, and so far we haven't found a variant that is resistant to them, especially in those very crucial areas of severe hospitalization and death. And it's my perspective that we are making so many trade-offs by staying in lockdown. Millions on NHS waiting lists, 20,000 pupils who have dropped out of school.
Yeah.
We have businesses that are going under, people losing their jobs, and we have to start talking, having a real serious conversation about the risks that we're willing to tolerate. And as long as these vaccines continue to work, I think we have to be willing to reopen society and let people live their lives once again.
Steve, are you confident the government is weighing up those risks? Part of that article says an unnamed cabinet minister says missing the June the 21st deadline would become Boris Johnson's Theresa May moment in reference to her extensions of the Brexit deal deadline. Do you agree with that?
I see why it was said, and I think there are some people around government, and I think there are some people around government and even in government who sort of convinced themselves that somehow we're going to be back to where we were. I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that. I've seen only evidence the efficacy of the vaccines are incredibly high. That's why there are so few people in hospital, and more people died in March of dementia and Alzheimer's than died of COVID. The sense of proportion is all wrong. On variants, whatever you call them, wherever they come from, generally follow the logic of the conversation that we are having in this country at the moment. With an endemic disease, there will be disease. With disease, there will be the virus, and viruses mutate. So therefore, until the whole world is vaccinated, which is never going to happen because there'll always be people who aren't vaccinated, there will always be COVID and there will always be variants of it. We cannot panic every single time that happens. We need to trust in our vaccine. And I completely agree with the previous speaker who said that people need to ask that question of what are we prepared to tolerate. Many of us have asked that question in the House of Commons. Well, the first year that I was in the public health job, 22,000 people died of seasonal influenza. It was a really bad year. It was a really bad strain. Nobody suggested that we should close down even wear a mask, let alone close down our schools. And one of my advisors then was a man called Professor Chris Whitty. So, our sense of proportion is all wrong. We have to understand that there will be variants of this disease, but we have a very high take-up of vaccination, so no contradiction there in those at-risk groups. And we've just got to get on with it. Because, we can't keep going back and forth in this cycle of lockdown, which, exactly right, as just said, the damage that we are doing to our society and our economy is going to be, the cure is going to be far greater than the disease.
Sorry,
Jo,
Laura.
can I just comment?
Yes, go on briefly.
For 1 second. I think it's very easy for a politician to sit on telly and say, we've got to weigh up the kind of risks and what are we willing to endure. Now, I'm not sitting here saying that this...
Laura.
Well, if you want to call me that, fine. I'd rather be kind of known as an activist. Now I'm not.
She's not in the House of Commons. But anyway, go on. Sorry, go on.
Apologise.
Yeah, I mean, have you not? Have you not missed me?
Well, of course, it's been empty in the chamber. But anyway, go on, Laura. Carry on.
I'm not a politician, aside from all of that, if you're sitting there as a politician on telly and you're not one of the people who has had to shield for the last year, or I don't know your personal circumstances, but kind of making that comment about the weight of the economy and the risks, there are 150,000 people who have died of this virus. I'm not saying that the last year has not been incredibly difficult for many reasons, but the binary between public health and the economy is a false equation, because actually the way this public health crisis has been handled, the global public health crisis, has caused a financial crisis. The two go hand in hand. The wellness of people is number one, and nothing comes before that.
All right, Laura,
so you're pursuing a zero COVID strategy and a zero risk strategy and a zero death strategy.
No, I am in complete favour of a total suppression of the virus, and that should have been done a year ago.
All right, we'll do that. Hang on, Steve and Laura, we're going to do that. We will come back to that because we have discussed it before, because I just want to draw your attention to this, which has just broken in the last half an hour, which is a tweet from Dominic Cummings, if you remember him, the former chief advisor to Boris Johnson, who is actually appearing before the Health and Social Care Select Committee next week. And here is a taster. Steve, he says, I've got the only copy of a crucial historical document from COVID decision-making? Should I, 1, give it to the committee next week or put it on a blog? B, auction it as an Ethereum NFT, non-fungible token, for those who don't know digital speak like me, and give the ETH, Ethereum, to a COVID families charity? Steve, your response? Which one would you pick?
First, I've heard of it when you said that. You know what? I love how everybody, including I'm sure Laura and the media, love to now quote Dominic Cummings as some kind of oracle.
I wasn't saying he was an oracle. I was just asking for your response.
He was persona non grata. Do you know what? I think my constituents made up their mind on Dominic Cummings last year. I made it up sometime before then, and I think I'm not going to do a running commentary on what Dominic Cummings does. I think there are bigger fish to fry.
All right, we will leave it there. I'll be interested to see if you are watching next week when he gives evidence. I'm just going to draw you to a story from last week and show you some pictures here of a standoff between the police and hundreds of protesters who gathered and surrounded an immigration enforcement van on Glasgow's south side. 2 men were released. The Home Office said the men had been detained over suspected immigration offences. To be clear, the large numbers of police you can see there were not assisting in the removal of these men, but were there to police the protest and ensure public safety. This is how Nicola Sturgeon, the First Minister, responded at the time. The Home Office needs to ask itself hard questions after today. Doing this on Eid, in the heart of our Muslim community and in the midst of a serious COVID outbreak, was staggeringly irresponsible. But the even deeper problem is an appalling asylum and immigration policy. I'd just like to welcome the local MP for that particular part of Glasgow, and Alison Thewlis, the SNP MP, as we show an article from today's Times which headlines "Politicians wrong for inciting crowd over Glasgow immigration raid." This is from a Conservative MSP, Dr Sandesh Gulhan, who said that he was concerned that elected officials were inciting people to come out in the south side of Glasgow and put themselves at risk in the middle of a pandemic, referring to not just the SNP but Scottish Labour and Scottish Greens, and also that immigration is a reserved matter and MSP should leave enforcement to the UK government. Do you agree with that, Alison, that it is the UK's government responsibility, it's a reserved matter for them and they're doing their job?
Well, first of all, I would like to correct any kind of inference that politicians were inciting people to go out into the street. That's absolute rubbish. People came out of their houses in Pollokshields because they saw their neighbours being taken away by UK immigration enforcement vans, and they rejected that, and they reject this hostile environment. And I could not be prouder of the people of Pollokshields for standing up for their neighbours.
Right, but Alison, my question was about the fact that it is a reserved power and matter for the UK government. Do you accept that and that they were doing their job?
It is a reserved power, but I see often in my casework as the local MP instances where the Home Office have made serious and grave errors in what they do. It's been proved through the Windrush scandal, the types of errors that the Home Office make in trying to remove people. They put, I think, over 100 people of the Windrush group into immigration detention, and they removed some of them from the country. And they had absolutely no right to do so, and that has been proven as well.
Right.
And we've seen in the past couple of weeks where EU nationals have been put into immigration detention as well, and all of this has been completely inappropriate. And of course, they don't need to do this during a pandemic as well, because there doesn't seem to be any real.
Does the law stop? Does the law stop then for religious festivals, which was the implication from Nicola Sturgeon's tweet, and for you saying during a pandemic?
There is no need to remove these people from their home during a pandemic. I would absolutely argue that completely. There's no reason why they need to be doing this at all.
OK, well, let's put that to Steve.
And the Home Office have not given any evidence for why they needed to do this at all during a pandemic.
Right, well, Steve, should this matter be devolved, given the clear strength of feeling, as expressed there by Alison Thewlis and from the people who were protesting there?
Well, I mean, that's another debate, isn't it? The reserve versus... I don't know the answer to that. I mean, the government's tackling illegal immigration. I'm staggered by what just heard from Alison Thewlis. You know, the operation in Glasgow was conducted in relation to suspected immigration offences. And I understand the two Indian nationals complied with the officers at all times. You know, every time I come on your programme, I seem to upset the SNP, so I might as well make it 3 in a row. I mean, look, we don't have a mob rule in this country. We have the rule of law. And if the police or immigration immigration officials decide that they want to arrest somebody because they suspect an offence has been committed, then that's what happens, and then it goes through the process of law. We don't have, the neighbours decide that can't happen because they decide that person is innocent. I mean, really, we don't live in the Wild West, Joe.
Right, Alison?
Well, we've got a long history in Glasgow, of course, of opposing dawn raids, immigration detention enforcement, and this goes back to 2005 when some pensioners and some young girls, the Glasgow girls, stopped their neighbours being removed in dawn raids up in Drumchapel as well, because we think this is a completely inhumane and disrespectful way to treat people, to drag people out of their homes through the streets and put them in a van and take them away. Is just not a humane way of carrying
then argue in the Westminster Parliament for a change in the law. We don't have.
I argue consistently
yeah, I know
and
you do.
overwhelmingly for a change in the law, and this has not done. Arguing for a change in the law is not getting us anywhere.
Steve?
Well, that's democracy. At the end of the day, we don't have street rule in this country, Alison. We have the rule of law. You say you're very proud of your constituents for doing what they did, and I'm sure that wins you some plaudits. But I'll tell you what my constituents would think is if somebody's committed an offence, then they should face the process of law.
Right, Alison, can I just put you? If Scotland became independent, would you still deport people who are in the country illegally?
First of all, nobody is illegal here. That's not the position, and I've seen many people who've been removed. What do you mean? I've seen many people removed and taken to Dungavel Detention Centre, a UK Home Office facility in Lanarkshire, who did not need to be there, who were subsequently released. And 2/3 of people who are taken into immigration detention centres in this country are subsequently removed because they should not have been there in the first place. This is a system which is failing to look after people's human rights. And this is, of course, the only country which detains people without any time limit as well. So people can be in there for months or for years, and there is absolutely no reason to do so.
Right.
In an independent Scotland, we would have a far more humane system based on dignity and respect, which is not the kind of system that we have just now.
What would that look like, your more humane system? How would you then deport somebody that was found to be either overstaying, perhaps on a visa, or here illegally?
Well, for a start, the way that the system works in the UK is not adequate. It is
right, but what's your humane? When you say it's more humane, what do you mean?
I mean that we would treat people with dignity and respect. And yes, there may well be circumstances where people end up not having the right to stay here, but dragging them out their house in the middle of the street in front of all their neighbours is no way to treat anybody. All
right, let's broaden it out, because I can hear the others trying to come in. Laura, to you, Humza Yousaf, who's Scotland's Justice Secretary, has called on Labour to push for the immediate devolution of asylum and immigration powers. Should they?
Well, I think the question is, some of the conversation before was quite remarkable. Alison is right, the Home Office get decisions wrong, and whether it is a devolved matter or not, we have to acknowledge that Priti Patel presides over a racist immigration system, and one which is so complex that people cannot get justice within it. So I was so heartened, moved to tears by the people of Pollokshields and solidarity with them. In my own area, they're trying to expand the immigration detention estate in Medhamsley, opening an immigration detention centre for women. Completely unnecessary. The problem is we don't have a safe passage to the UK. So what Steve doesn't talk about when he talks about criminals and immigration crime is that even entering the country, even entering the UK can criminalise you because there isn't a safe passage to the UK. Not having legal representation to get the Home Office to believe that you're in danger in the country that you come from, or being able to make your way through such a complex immigration system means that sometimes your claims can expire and then you are criminalised by the system. So this binary between, people mob rule saving these kind of immigration criminals is an invention of the Tories to dehumanise those people who have crossed borders. And I would just say again, solidarity with the people of Pollokshields.
You made that
more
clear.
Protection of refugees,
Steve, I will let you come back
and immigrants, not less.
I will come back to you, Steve, in a moment. But I just want to get Louise and Kate's thoughts. Louise, listening to this whole discussion, there is quite a lot to unpack here, and a couple of questions to put to you. It is important that people have the facts at their disposal in terms of what is happening. There is a system, rightly or wrongly, to deport people who are found to be here illegally. Alison Thewlis has made very clear that mistakes are made. What's your view?
Well, I mean, on this particular case, I think we're crediting the immigration service with more thought than anything else. That I bet they didn't even know it was Eid when they decided to take that action. And I think if I have any criticism of all of this, it's actually that the immigration service just is always completely unkind in its dealings with people, and it doesn't need to be. Police officers make arrests of people in all sorts of circumstances. They go into houses with children and arrest and remove fathers, often in domestic violence situations, and so on and so forth. So we know it can be done. I am really tired, Jo, of hearing about things like people being deported in handcuffs and not even getting medication. There's a cruelty to it that is completely unnecessary and doesn't dignify the long history we have in this country.
Right.
Of the other point I just need to make, though, about the Scottish angle on all of this is that actually the vast majority of asylum seekers and refugees are in England, and that what you see is that they are shunted, and I use that word deliberately, out to quite a lot of our northern towns. When I was in the middle of getting everybody in on the homelessness work last year, the National Asylum Service reopened, and they placed hundreds of asylum seekers in Birmingham and in Manchester with like 2 staff. And then there was also that thing that happened in Glasgow. So I think the problem with all of this, Jo, is nobody really wants to talk about it. So you've got the right saying it's all terrible, we can't let anybody in. And you've got the left saying you're all racist, bleak, because you won't let anybody in. And somewhere in the middle of all of this, the public know that the left are wrong and that the right are wrong. Right. And that somehow in the middle of our lives, we aren't getting this right. I've got one comment before the programme ends on Dominic Cummings, if you'll let me have it later.
All right, well, you'll have to remind me. I might forget about him, God forbid. Kate, before I come to you, Steve, you should respond to some of that, particularly this issue about, you know, does the immigration service use unnecessary cruelty? Does it have to be this way?
I don't know whether it uses. I don't believe it uses always unnecessary cruelty. I mean, look, I love the non-answer you got about an independent Scotland's immigration policy, which is to treat people humanely. That should be a given everywhere. I mean, look, as for solidarity with illegals, you know, if. And I know Laura's not an MP at the moment, but, you know, if the Labour Party want to go to the... Sorry, I got that wrong. If the Labour Party want to go to the next election in the seats that they are falling like stones to the Conservatives, arguing these kind of lines, then be our guest. We should have a sensible, humane, legal migration system into this country, and this country should always be a safe haven for those escaping persecution, as it always has been.
Right, Kate.
And really, we should get away from the silly, hysterical nonsense that we've heard today. But, you know, if the Labour Party want to take that to the next election, be my guest.
Hang on, Laura, because I need to bring Kate in as well. Kate, can you do the politics? I mean, just as it's sort of been set out by Steve there in terms of what voters feel about these issues? Is it, as Louise says, you know, they're somewhere in the middle?
Well, immigration was a huge issue leading up to the Brexit referendum, but then it became less of an issue when it felt like the UK was in control of these matters. And Boris Johnson's government, the immigration reforms he's made, in some ways make it easier to come here now as a non-EU citizen, especially if you're young and you go to university in this country. So we've seen some liberalization, which the public, clearly we saw in the locals, has not pushed back on. But I would take issue with some of Steve's comments there. He said that the UK isn't the Wild West. Well, no, of course it's not. But just because there is a rule or a law in place does not automatically make it just. And it may be that the Home Office was doing its job, but its job includes very heavy-handed tactics, raids of weddings, raids of homes at dawn or in the morning. And I was personally very moved when I saw people in Scotland coming out saying, these are our neighbours and we don't want you to take them away. You can say go to the polls and vote about this. It's a democratic issue. Of course, immigration is a democratic issue, and there has been pushback on immigration over the years. But in the meantime, we are talking about very personal stories, people's lives being completely destroyed by heavy-handed implementation of immigration policy.
All right.
That's true for asylum seekers. It's true for people who have even come here illegally, people who have then crafted a life who should be given a pathway to stay.
All right, we're going to move on, but thank you to Alison Thewlis for joining us for that discussion, Alison. Let's point you to this headline, another BBC News story. UK job vacancies highest for a year as lockdown eases. And let's also have a look at the picture on employment from this data from the HMRC and Office for National Statistics. I'm showing viewers a graph for the guests there. We're looking at the number of employees in the UK, and you can see at the start of last year, January 2020, over 29 million were employed. That fell by about a million, down to just over 28 million in November last year. But it's the number of employees has now partially bounced back to just 28.3 million. Kate, just sort of bearing those figures in mind, are they a sign that the economy is beginning to recover from the huge shock of the pandemic?
Broadly speaking, yes. I think you can pick out some really positive information in this data. Vacancies back to pre-pandemic levels. You've actually seen the unemployment headline figure fall ever so slightly. It's been hovering around 5%, but it's actually gone down over the past few months. But I think what it really does is boost the furlough scheme. If I were the Chancellor, I'd be feeling pretty chuffed that my scheme had panned out. It did what it was designed to do, which was to shield and shelter jobs from being lost while the economy was forced to hibernate. We all need to prepare for the fact that as the furlough scheme lifts, there very likely is going to be an uptick in unemployment. But the key here is that, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, the projections were that we would be facing 10%, 12% chronic unemployment. Well, the big hitters, the big forecasters have been downgrading that to around 6%. Now, that is still, too high. Every single job loss is a human story behind it. But to get through a period of lockdowns that's going to have lasted well over a year, and to have controlled unemployment in that way, to have kept some kind of a cap on it, will be a huge achievement. My one caveat to this, of course, is if we get to the 21st of June and there are still major restrictions in place, especially around social distancing or capacity, which means that businesses cannot operate as normal, we should expect to see these forecasts for unemployment rise again, and that's going to be extremely painful. So I think there should be real incentive to make sure that, given the fact that we have protected so many jobs, we can continue to do that into the future when we are so-called free. But if that freedom isn't real freedom for businesses and customers to operate, we're going to see it reflected in the data.
OK, Louise, other data shows that there are still 6 million people currently receiving universal credit. It is still extremely high. And as you know, during the pandemic, the government made universal credit a little bit more generous with a £20 a week increase. Should that stay? Because it looks as if it may go in October, which is when the furlough will be unwound completely.
Well, I think it would be disastrous if the £20 uplift went. I think on every single level, redundancy, unemployment, even though there are, the obvious benefits of the furlough scheme, to quote Kate, shield sheltering people, fantastic. That's a great expression for what it's done. And it's shown that we can stick by people in times of trouble. I think this winter and 2022 are going to be really, really rough. I think that we've got a benefit level now in the UK at its lowest since the 1990s, whilst the cost of living has gone up by 40%. And my biggest indicator, and I'm worrying now that they're becoming part of our national fabric of institutions, is the extraordinary use of food banks and the exponential growth in them, for a good reason, that people need to use them. The Trestle Trust report out last week made very sad reading. So obviously I think that we should make one of the things about levelling up, which is ending hunger in the United Kingdom. And part of that, Jo, is going to be the £20 must stay in place and be extended to other groups on benefits. Remember, that's only gone to people on UC.
Yes.
It doesn't go to other people on other forms of benefits.
Steve, can you answer that directly, Louise's points?
No, because I'm not the Chancellor. But I mean, I think I agree with the comments around the furlough scheme. I mean, the Chancellor was very clear that he couldn't protect every business and he couldn't save every job. But my goodness, he has tried and gone a long way to do it.
But should they keep that £20 a week increase permanent?
I can't say yes to that, because you don't write budgets on Politics Live, no matter how good it is.
But what do you think?
I think that really we have we're spending about 100 billion quid a year on benefits for working age people. The £20 a week increase was the right thing to do for the further 6 months. I think it's right now that the government should shift its focus to support people back into work. And you've seen some of the stuff announced last week in the Queen's speech about the lifetime skills guarantee. I don't know. I mean, I know everybody else will be very easy to spend my constituents' money, but at the end of the day, the government doesn't have any money. It only has your money, and ultimately, one day it has to be paid back.
Right.
What we hear today that there's all sorts of sums being done as to around how much more we're going to have to spend on support packages, furlough scheme, uplifts if June the 21st isn't June the 21st. What we should be doing is giving businesses a chance to trade, and then that creates jobs, and then that allows them to save themselves.
Let me ask Laura about Labour's position, because the government says that this increase of £20 a week for UC universal credit costs £6 billion a year. Is that Labour's focus? Because Labour have said they want to abolish universal credit and haven't said what they would replace it with. So should their focus, and is their focus, on billions more for welfare?
Well, in my former position when I was a politician, I was Shadow Secretary of State for Employment Rights, and there isn't a similar position in government. It was going to be a new role. Sure. And actually, I think what all of this conversation is missing is the systemic problem with the way labour is valued and the way work is valued. So we have endemic poverty pay. Yeah. So Steve talks about his constituents' money paying for people. Actually, lots of people that interact with universal credit are people in work who are being paid the minimum wage, and we know that is not enough for many people to live on without getting into debt or without it being subsidised to kind of meet, not luxurious lifestyles.
Yeah, but on the today questions, is that what you want?
I think universal credit, the £20 uplift, should be extended, because I think it was an acknowledgement by the government. I think it should be permanent. I think it was an acknowledgement.
Even though Labour wants to get rid of universal credit.
That people, they're not in government, are they? So they talk about universal credit being a system which perpetuates this low wage economy. And actually what we want to do, I mean, our plan was sectoral collective bargaining, where we start to organise entire sectors and evaluate what rate people should be paid for the job. Look at look at the care sector, for example. People who have nursed our loved ones throughout this pandemic on minimum wage, accessing food banks, being exposed to coronavirus. I mean, in my view, that would be the first sector that you start for a wholesale review of how,
all right,
how
well,
much
let me
those
put
people
you let me put to you where
paid.
the direction of the current shadow cabinet is. Obviously, as you say, Labour is not in government. Labour does have a new shadow chancellor in Rachel Reeves. She made some interesting comments about welfare when she was Shadow Work and Pension Secretary under Ed Miliband's leadership. She said Labour should take a tough approach with welfare claimants, and she said that a Labour government shouldn't tolerate people, in her words, lingering on benefits. Is she right?
Absolutely not. I couldn't disagree. It's a false characterisation of people who access the welfare state or the social security system, however you want to put it. Right. It's a mischaracterisation. People are having to have their low pay topped up by the state because employers are getting away. Laura, I'm going to
have to interrupt because I've got your characterisation. We've only got a few minutes left. You look sceptical, Louise, at that.
Yeah, look, I mean, there's just got to be some reality in all of this. Right now, we've got millions of people that need help, Jo, and that must continue. And, in Steve's constituency, he probably had a load of people furloughed, and they'll get jobs when they come out of this. Well, bully for him and bully for them. I'm delighted that my taxes went towards his people being furloughed. But the people in Burnley, who 13% worked from home last year, they now need our help when we're coming out of this pandemic. And I'm begging people like Steve in the Conservative Party to just broaden the mind a bit. Please, God, help those people that are deserving poor and do need our help as we come through the pandemic. And on the left, I'm sorry, I'm probably speaking to, I'll shut up really quickly, but the idea that everybody who is poor is only poor because they don't have the right check, they don't have the right money coming in, is just not true. I mean, if you check some of these families where men drink the benefits away and they never get near the children, it's like there has to be some reality here. But right now, I am worried about the millions of people that need that helping hand as we come out.
All right, now very briefly, I know you said you're going to shut up, but I've remembered you were going to say something about Dominic Cummings. What was it?
I am utterly appalled that that man thinks it's okay to Twitter out whether he, what should I do? Should I hand this into the inquiry? Should I, put it out on the Twitter sphere?
Okay.
He was a public servant paid by us. If he's got documents, you hand them over to the inquiry and you play by the rules.
And that's it.
Far too much airtime.
That's all we've got time for. Bye-bye.